All right, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. This is Emil Chakis. I'm president and founder of the EveryLife Foundation for Rare Diseases. We're going to be doing a webinar today about Cure the Process 2, essentially the launch of our next stage Cure the Process campaign. Thank you all for joining us this morning. On the WebEx, we'll be working through some slides, and hope you can follow along with us. Our goal here is improving the development process of rare disease treatments, and we'll tell you a little about the foundation and about a little of the history that brings us to today, and then we'll go into the next stage of the Cure the Process campaign called Cure the Process 2. So just a brief bit about the foundation. We're dedicated to accelerating biotechnology innovation for rare diseases. And our focus is really on practical, scientifically sound things that we can do that would help improve the predictability of the regulatory process. Our goal is to find those small things. If we fix them, we can have a big impact on the development of treatments for rare diseases. And we're doing that both by analysis and our experience in drug development, as well as looking at grassroots support and feedback from patient groups and patients, and also conducting expert-led workshops, which allow us to get input from those who are struggling to work on development of rare disease therapeutics. We believe that no disease is too rare to deserve treatment, meaning even though a disease is extremely rare, it doesn't mean if we have the science that we shouldn't translate it and make that into an available treatment. All treatment should be safe and effective. That is, we think that there should be data showing that the drug works and does something that is not dangerous to patients, and that we need to consider that in everything we're doing with regard to drug development. We also firmly believe that we could be doing more with the science we already have. That is, that there's science out there that's already been developed for some rare diseases that isn't translating as efficiently as it could, and we think that the system needs to be improved so that we can translate that science into medicines for patients today. The roadblocks in development of rare disease treatments, there are many. There's probably more challenges for rare disease than common diseases, primarily because they're rare, and that means there's less understanding of how the disease evolves and develops. And even though the science for the disease in some of these diseases is very clear, like they're genetic and we understand exactly what's wrong, not knowing enough about the disease and having no prior drugs developed makes it harder to do drug development and find those answers to these patients' problems. The lack of a defined regulatory pathways is particularly problematic for diseases that have never been treated before. There may be limited clinical study experience, no history about how disease progresses, quantitatively what's wrong with them, and there may be no endpoints established for that disease that are readily used in a subsequent development program. There are often no biomarkers at all that have been tested in clinical development, and very little data about how the biomarkers relate to clinical outcomes. There's also a very small number of highly variable patients out there to participate in trials. In order to do the trials, it becomes very difficult to find a group of patients that are similar enough to each other to be able to do a controlled study. And so these will challenge our traditional clinical trial designs and analyses. Potential treatment development costs can be relatively large then for some of these very small population diseases where there's really not enough patients to make it economically plausible to develop the treatment. And our goal is to try to improve the process so that even those smaller diseases can make sense as an investment and drive the investment of funds and resources into developing a therapeutic. Now, in order to put this together in 2009, the small EveryLife Foundation team working at that time out of a hotel room began working on our plan, and that plan was to pick 3 goals that we thought were the most important, plausible, tractable changes that could be made to the system that would improve the development of rare disease therapeutics. We launched that campaign at the 2009 Rare Disease Summit in Washington, D.C., and launched those things standing in front of a group of FDA and other rare disease groups and talked about the difficult challenges, and we weren't afraid to step out and say what's not working and to do it and engage with the people involved in that process in a public forum. So what we came up with in the original goals of the Cure the Process campaign was the specialized drug review. We talked about, in order to do that, creating special offices or review divisions that would review specific rare disease areas. It was not a review division for all rare diseases. It was a division to handle specific types of diseases, and we talked about biochemical and genetic disorders as one particular area. We also talked about increasing the accelerated approvals, that is, making it more accessible to patients drugs that would be approved using a biomarker in the what's called the Subpart H or accelerated approval pathway. That pathway was accessible to HIV and cancer, but not for rare disease therapeutics in general. We also felt that with rare diseases that improving clinical study designs and analyses could help us devise studies that would detect efficacy and establish safety in smaller studies with rigor and the kind of outcomes that would allow you to determine whether a drug works or not. And that traditional designs that were involved in treating hundreds of patients in a study don't necessarily work that well when you're talking about only 20 patients and a very complex heterogeneous disease with patients maybe ages 5 to 50 in the same study. These things require specialized design and analyses, and these were our three goals. We started working in several ways to make that vision become a reality. We had a workshop series. We conducted several workshops on these topics to help get consensus among experts in the field in drug development, including FDA as well as academia and industry. We developed some ideas on how you might approach that, and we're continuing to write up some of these ideas that we've established. We also organized and educated the patient groups and developed a grassroots effort to unify these patients into a force for change at the congressional level. We published a white paper, our original one, and we have a second one coming that establishes our views of, in a scientifically and academically sound way, of why these things need to change and what the benefits are of change. And we work with Congress directly to move legislation forward with the help of patient groups that would provide the kind of incremental changes that will allow the system to work better and achieve success. The most important effort we've made on the legislative side is the ultra-fast legislation, which we initiated in 2011, but it was signed into law in 2012 as part of FDASIA. And the bill was a collaboration between both sides of the aisle, of Representative Stearns and Towns involved in as our original leaders on that bill, and ultimately the language within FAST became part of PDUFA 5, which is now known as FDASIA. The great thing there is the patient community, many of you on the call today, were a powerful political force that allowed us to send Congress notes and communications and calls that let them know what we wanted as a rare disease community, and that support actually was quite important in making Congress act and take forward this bill within FDASIA. FDASIA was signed into law, and we continue to work with stakeholders to implement the legislation. So I want to thank all the 181 partners who signed on, took care of the process, and that helped us with the FAST legislation, FDASIA. I think we continue to work in FDASIA and that implementation, and we think that there's still more to be done in the area of accelerated approval. But we do think that your help in doing that was quite critical. So with FDASIA, it was a great start. We know a lot more need to be done, and many people have asked why not fix everything, and the truth is it's really hard to fix everything at once. Our thinking is that we need to focus on those pieces that can be moved and move them. Our goal is not to try to fix all things at once. We just don't think it's plausible, and we want to be effective. And so we try to focus on those pieces that we think we can move. We think those areas that are still problems that we should focus on are the fact that there's a relative lack of expertise and specialization in complex rare diseases in drug review divisions. And that is a challenge, and the FDA has always had a challenge acquiring the best talent in all of the areas, and it is a problem also in how it's organized, that is whether we have the people trained in the subspecialties of medicine that are required in order to do drug review. We think early-stage clinical trials lately have begun overseas commonly, and this is partly related to the way safety testing and the toxicology requirements are applied in the U.S. compared to other countries for rare life-threatening diseases. We think that's a challenge if science that's been developed here in the U.S. is now not even available to U.S. patients at all until later stage development. And we think that offshoring of clinical trials is an issue that needs improvement. Thirdly, we have been watching the repurposing goals of many foundations trying to take common, inexpensive generic drugs and get them translated and developed for rare disease uses. But the challenge has been not enough support for these things, these development programs, and yet there are hundreds of drugs that are patented and that also are maybe very targeted and newer drugs with excellent safety testing that could be repurposed but are not being repurposed. And so these companies at that point have no interest in repurposing a drug for a very small market when they have so many other patients using the drug. And so patients are using the drugs off-label or without real safety and efficacy data. And we think that's something that could be improved with something very small, and that would be part of our goals. So the Cure the Process campaign, too, is our attempt to try to solve those three areas. Rationalize. We're trying to encourage the FDA to accommodate a more scientifically rational, flexible application of safety data requirements so that patients can have access to early-stage trials on par with Europe and other territories. We think we've seen some movement at FDA in this regard, and we held a workshop on that. But we think rationalizing safety testing so that we assure patients get access and are not denied early-stage development access to treatments is important. Secondly, we want to incentivize the development of rare disease therapeutics. Our goal here is to enact some legislation to encourage and provide a benefit to industry for repurposing major market drugs that are patented, or what we call rare purpose these drugs, to ensure patients have access to safe and affordable as well as effective treatments that have been well tested. We think right now that rare purposing of patented drugs is just not happening, and we would like to figure out legislation that would improve that. Finally, we still are asking for specialization, and we think the FDA needs to specialize further and look at creating more specialized drug review divisions to allow reviewers more time and access to the latest science, to allow them to focus into an area and get very good at it, to be trained in that area of medicine. And we know the challenges with the FDA in managing as many drug applications that may come through and the complexities of all of this. We do think we need to do what we can to support the FDA with regard to increasing specialization of drug review, and we think that this will do a lot toward improving the development of rare disease therapeutics. And we'll provide a little more detail on all three of these now. So let's talk about specialization for review. So when you're talking about a disease as complex as some of the inborn errors, having no training in that area definitely makes it challenging. And what we need now is more specialized experience and training at FDA. We think that, in addition, that the FDA needs to be allowed some concurrent academic activity so that they can keep up with what's going on in their field, attend conferences, and be thoroughly engaged with the community of scientists and academics out there that are doing research and understand what people believe and what's going on. We think that they need enough time to be able to research complex target indications, understand and hone their skills. We think with specialized training and enough experience and control of their time, we think it's possible that we can get people that would be more knowledgeable about these rare disease areas and be able to keep up with science. And we think this would result in a better approval process and better guidance to companies doing drug development. The needs of increasingly complex rare disease therapeutic areas are a challenge for FDA, and these diseases are only getting more and more complicated. I think it's time to recognize that these diseases deserve just as much specialization as we have in HIV, drugs, or in cancer. One of the examples we've given to the FDA regarding specialization relates to certain specific disease areas. Currently, for example, inborn errors or biochemical genetic disorders are reviewed within the gastroenterology division, and really there's not much relationship between gastroenterology and these drug areas. We think that having people really knowledgeable in inborn errors is very important, in that a review division that's focused on some of these rare disorders would be smarter and would allow people to be trained and focused on a more narrower set of disease areas. So we suggest on the right, for example, and this is just an outline of the organizational structure within the Office of New Drugs, and this is the place within the FDA that reviews drugs, that a group that's focused on biochemical and genetic disorders, which are the type of disorder that require training in medical genetics, should have a review division that focuses on this area, and there are a number of drugs being developed in this area. Similarly, if you look on the left in the neurology, near the Neurology Office of Drug Evaluation, you'll see instead of having pediatric neuromuscular disease like Duchenne's reviewed within neurology, we think those diseases should get reviewed within a pediatric neuromuscular disease, just like SMA and other rare neuromuscular diseases. These are very different diseases from Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, and are different neurologists. These are often pediatric neurologists, different training group, and we think that that is something that we should be doing. So this gives you an idea of how, by specializing the drug review divisions, getting them more narrowly focused, we can get better expertise and allow us to get experts that are well-trained in particular areas of medicine. And we think that specialization would have an important impact in improving the drug review process and drug development. Let's talk on the next goal, rationalizing safety requirements. From my own experience in drug development, there's been a steady shift in how safety testing has been done, particularly in the enzyme replacement area. In the early days, if we treated a few dogs and showed that they were safely treated and effective, that may have been enough to go into the clinic. And these days, the requirements have gotten greater and greater, such that, in fact, they're so expensive and so long that, in many cases, the enzyme replacement therapy programs are starting in the UK rather than the US because of the delays and costs of getting things started. The FDA, of course, is trying to assure a consistent level of safety, but many of these programs where the enzyme is a known human protein that's in our body, we think, and given that and the severity of these diseases, we think that there should be some rational risk-based assessment of whether what level of safety testing is required before a clinical study can start, and, of course, what is required before a drug can get approved. The FDA, we think, should follow the same ICH guidelines and risk-based flexibility that are applied by other competent authorities. We've held a workshop on this issue. I think there is some flexibility within the FDA into what they need to do. I think we just need to try to coordinate and collaborate on what are those things that can be done to alter the risk-based assessment of safety testing and allow improvement in the accessibility of early-stage studies to U.S. patients. And to stop the offshoring of clinical studies to other territories that are allowing or more flexible. We've had a workshop on this. We've talked about what is required for an IND-enabling tox program, and there is definitely some flexibility within the FDA in this regard. We think we should push further, and we'll be writing up an editorial from the workshop to help push forward the goal of improving what is required to get into a study in the U.S. and make it align better with what's done in other countries. We think that by itself will open up more studies to be started in the U.S. and not to be offshored. So that's one key goal for us. The workshop we held then was on September 16th. I think it was fairly well attended by the FDA, as well as we had a speaker, David Jones from the MHRA, the UK equivalent of the FDA. And I thought it was a very good discussion about what is IND enabling. It was pretty clear that the FDA is moving into a more rational direction, and rather than a one-size-fits-all approach. And I think we just need to continue that discussion, help drive forward more rationalization of safety testing for therapeutics in rare disease area. Some of that relates to using what is done in cancer and trying to apply it more for rare diseases, and just that means getting the agency to recognize that these diseases are just as bad as cancer. They're at least as lethal and as severe, and therefore the accommodations made in cancer patients should be equally considered for rare disease therapies. We think there were some good outcomes in from this workshop, and we'll be pressing ahead on writing those up. Last thing I want to talk about is incentivizing the investment in rare disease drug development, and we're introducing here the Orphan Product Extensions Act, or OPEN Act, which is in development still. The goal of the Act is basically to take advantage of what's really going on in the therapeutics area. If you look at generic drugs that are already past their patents, there may be many of those are older drugs that people are trying to test out to see whether they might treat a rare disease. And while that may be effective, there's no one interested in doing it. And those drugs are older and may not be as well tested. The truth is there are hundreds of large market patent drugs that are very targeted, they're on the market, have been pretty well tested. But those companies will not invest in the testing. And they won't because they're on the market in a large market area. There's no incentive for them financially to invest millions of dollars in drug development for something that will add essentially no revenue. And they're a business and they have to adhere to their principles as a business. The truth is also, and probably the biggest factor, is that adverse events that might occur in those rare disease patients who may be sicker than their usual patient could result in problems for them on their label or impact their overall market. And that risk, therefore, is too great for them to even allow their drugs to get used in such studies. And so right now, this situation is basically that we have hundreds of patented rare drugs that might be used in rare diseases that are actually not getting repurposed at all. So the question is, and we asked ourselves, can we create an incentive so that these patented drugs that are out there would to create an advantage for these companies to repurpose these drugs into the rare disease space? What would be an incentive that would help them move forward on development? So what we thought about here is creating a new orphan product repurposing exclusivity. And what this means is that since there's no financial incentive in that particular small rare disease market, what we'd like to say is if the sponsor were to do development in a rare disease area and they have a product on the market, let's say for under patent protection for a major market, they could then seek development in a rare disease indication, and if they succeeded in getting that indication on their label, it may by itself not have much financial benefit, but what we would do is provide an additional 6 months of exclusivity at the end of their patent. That would allow them 6 more months of their larger market in sales. So by doing that, then the incentive basically is they can get 6 more months of their whole market sales by doing the rare disease development. So the rare disease would be leveraging the investment already made in these large market disorders, and the return on investment for a company would be that they'd get 6 more months of their major market. To make this work, the new indication doing must be a rare disease that have orphan drug designation. It must qualify for fast track, that is, has to be serious or life-threatening disease without adequate treatment. And we believe, and it's very important, that they acquire the data so that the new rare disease indication is on the label. That means they have to do high-quality dosing studies and controlled pivotal studies that are sufficient to get the drug on the label. And we think it's important that we get hard, rigorous science done, and so that patients know what they're getting treated by and what it does and what it doesn't do and whether it's safe or not. And we want to move away from rare disease patients randomly using drugs at unknown doses, untested doses with uncertain benefits. We think driving high-quality science is important. By putting it on the label, this means they're going to have to meet the standards for getting it approved in that rare disease indication. That means they are going to have to invest something in order to get this benefit. We think that's an appropriate balance point for the 6-month exclusivity that we're providing. So what would happen if they have, let's say a major company has a product on the market and this bill passes, they would then look potentially at each of their drugs and say, this drug, we have a drug that maybe targets a particular pathway. Are there rare diseases in that pathway? They could explore it with foundations, others, find pathways, diseases that are affecting that same pathway that might be rare, that don't have any treatments. They could then initiate 2 or 3 different rare disease treatments we think would possibly happen to try to find at least one of them that could get approved. They would have to do a phase 1/2 type study, that is to evaluate the dose and safety, and then they would have to do a phase 3-like study, which would evaluate the efficacy and longer-term safety. They would have to do high-quality, rigorous studies and communicate with the FDA and the regulatory authorities to get that approved. When the company gets it approved and put on their label, with safety, efficacy, and the dosing demonstrated, they then get 6 months of additional market exclusivity at the end of the product patent life, or the end of their NCE exclusivity period, wherever their protection ends. And we would think this would stack on top of the pediatric exclusivity that already exists. And so that if you were doing, for example, pediatric cancer, you would get 6 months because it's pediatric and 6 months also for being a cancer. And we think this would, particularly for pediatric cancer, for example, would be an extraordinarily important way to get cancer drugs that are approved for adults to actually be tested in kids where there may be only a few hundred cases, but for which the drug might be life-saving. The key benefits of what we call rare purposing is the following. We already know who the sponsor is. They already own the drug. They're already running development. They have experts in their company that do it. They already have the financial capability of running the development, and they have a financial goal in doing it. We leverage existing expertise in those scientists and staff. They know the drug. They know how to design studies in it. And they know what to measure. They know the biomarkers that show its effect. They've already manufactured, and they've already done the toxicology work. All that stuff is done, and they already know safety in large number of patients and humans. All that stuff is done, so it's all they need to do is figure out safety, efficacy, dosing within a rare disease population. Therefore, there's a very reduced time of development by leveraging all that expertise in a group of people that already know how to run the development of this program. Great thing about this, then, is that once approved, that indication approved, the pricing for the drug has already been established for the large market. That whatever that pricing is, in fact, will be likely to be much less than the typical orphan drug pricing where the development has to be recouped from just a few hundred patients. In this case, there may be a few 100,000 or a few million patients that take the drug, and therefore the pricing would be the same as for that other market. So we're actually leveraging that investment in the large market and getting orphan drugs now that are not necessarily expensive. And we think if you look at the broad situation in pricing and cost right now, if all the drugs are very highly narrow and specific and very expensive, it's becoming a problem in a sustainable model. But if some of the drugs are less expensive because we've leveraged our technology, and then there's some that are expensive that are dedicated, that balance will help make this more sustainable as a model for developing rare disease drugs. So we think that's an important benefit of leveraging the existing expertise and resources in large market drugs. We think there's a lot of wins in this story. The public health, patients have access to safe, effective treatments as the rare disease patients. The prices for those drugs will be priced more at major market rates rather than the extreme pricing necessary for rare disease drugs. We think the FDA, the improved access, excellence, and specialization will be important for the program, and we think the economy will benefit from the investment that will come in from the incentivized program. That is, the investment in new studies will involve grants to universities, more jobs related to that, as well as more jobs within the industry. We think all of that will be a plus for the programs. Now, currently, there is an initiative called the 21st Century Cures Initiative, which is looking at ways to improve the development of therapeutics for disease in general. And we are looking to try to implement some of the Cure the Process goals within the 21st Century Cures Initiative. We have submitted a white paper comments on the first series, and we are working closely with the Energy and Commerce Committee leadership. Perhaps Open Act could be part of that, and perhaps there's other aspects of specialization or the rationalization that might be part of this effort. So we've told you a lot about what we're doing. Now the question is, how can you get involved to help us? We'd like to reach our goal of 200 patient organizations supporting the Cure the Process 2 campaign. And what we need in order to get you involved is an endorsement pack included in the webinar information, or you can find it on our website. And that includes information and a basic letter that you would sign on letter that will allow us to reference you as supporting the Cure the Process campaign. You submit your endorsement letter to the email curetheprocess@everylifefoundation.org and promote the campaign to your members, help us support it. There may be points in time where we'll call on you for action alerts or to take action and push ahead these goals. And by being connected in as a affiliate of this effort, you'll have a chance to see what's going on and have an impact in a big way in Washington on behalf of your patients and rare disease patients. So that's the